Welcome, everybody, to a Good Story podcast. Today, we're going to be covering conquered peoples, their stories, and, as you can imagine, probably some of the horrors that come along with being conquered. We'll first cover the Congo, where a king owned the entire land as his own private land, how it pushed Belgium into becoming a colonizer, how cutting off hands became a cultural norm to meet brutal rubber quotas, and how baskets full of hands came to mark Belgium's occupation of the Congo. Next, we'll go to Carthage and Rome. We'll talk about Hannibal, how Rome eventually won the Punic Wars, how they treated Carthage afterwards, and a myth about the destruction that isn't actually true. And lastly, we'll go into Charlemagne and the Saxons, how implementing a new strategy in dealing with conquered peoples, how he simply deported all these conquered peoples to different lands and replaced them very effectively, and how he destroyed their favorite religious tree. All right, let's jump into it.
Alrighty.
All right, so
y'all didn't hear that, but we just had a very touching moment.
We did indeed. So let us start with conquered peoples. I wanted to cover the Congo, and specifically, they've probably in this land, what is today the Democratic Republic of the Congo, has probably been fought over, and it does have different tribes and different groups of people. But I want to focus on when the Belgians came in, or more specifically, a Belgian king and not the actual country itself. But just to give a little bit of background, Belgium as a country, that's a key fact in here, controlled the Democratic Republic from 1908 to 1960. And King Leopold II was trying to persuade the government to go into the Congo. They didn't want to originally. And then later, due to international pressure, the actual government, the country itself, took over the Congo. And that's going to be what we're going to talk about. But I'll give a little bit more background. Basically, the government said, nah, we're not really into it. So Leopold II sets up his own colony. He has backers, he sends people there, and he never visits. He never directly rules in the sense of, I'm a ruler, here I am. He just was in Belgium as a king. It was a constitutional monarchy, so he has no power for people to know. So there's a prime minister and all that stuff in Belgium at this point. And so he sets up what's called the Free State, and it goes to shit. It's very barbaric, and to the point where we're talking about the late 1800s, very late 1800s to the early 1900s. So it's not as if Europe itself was this lovey-dovey, we're not above massacring people to conquer them or whatever, but even European,
but at least in their own like home countries, they had like the industrial age. Like at least they were like modern.
Yeah. And so it was so bad that the international community came together and said like, hey, as I said, Belgium took over in 1908 because international pressure, they didn't even want to, but international pressure had been going for about 4 years. So Belgium said, all right, we'll take it. So then
we'll do it.
We'll take it. So the government ends up sending missionaries there, setting up private businesses and whatnot. And in the 1940s, 1950s, it actually becomes very urbanized in certain areas. And they have double the labor force of any other colony in Africa. So they actually had a lot of workers there. And so it's actually pretty prosperous. But then, as you know, one does when you have a middle class and stuff, you had all these Europeanized Africans, and they all wanted, and other groups wanted independence. So in 1960, they gained
what? No.
Blasphemy. Shouldn't they be grateful for their oppression? We've civilized you.
Thanking us. So anyway, I'm not going to get into the whole history. That's not why I covered it, because they do get their independence, and needless to say, everything goes to shit for quite a long time due to the Cold War, due to Belgium still interfering in their politics, due to tribal rivalries and hatred, and yeah, it didn't go well, and it's pretty terrible to this day. So that didn't work out, but we're gonna go back in time for a second to a time that might have even been worse than now. So, as I said, the key thing here is that Belgium took over in 1908, but King Leopold II had been, at this time, everyone in Europe, or at least the main major countries, they have colonies all around the world. And Belgium, King Leopold II, who had no actual power, he was asking the government, hey guys, come on, let's be an empire. Let's make little Belgium an empire. Because, that's the first thing everyone thinks when they think of Belgium. The country that had to be protected by Britain from Germany invading. And they said, hey, if you invade through Belgium, we're going to defend our little friends there. So anyways.
Belgium had some pretty good colonies at this point, though. Like, I mean, they weren't exactly like Britain, France, or Spain at this point, but like, they weren't doing too bad.
They definitely were not like Britain, Spain. Well, Spain at this point was
on the wane. Completely.
They lost they had at this point. I think they had lost. When did they lose Cuba to us?
You said this was the early 1900s. They'd
already lost it. The Monroe Doctrine was already like a big thing by then.
Yeah, their empire kind of didn't make it into the 20th century.
I think
the Dutch didn't do very well.
Yeah.
Nah, the Dutch fell apart. Britain at this point was still doing fairly well. They still had India and all that jazz. And anyway, lost America though. But so they're basically.
Did they really though? We just were like, okay, yeah, we're no longer your colony, but we're going to become like your best friend. So
eventually, Joe, spoilers.
Eventually, yeah.
Not at first, not for the dude. They came back and burned down the White House.
Burned down the White
House. Yeah, but after that, though, after the War of 1812, we became friends fairly quickly.
Now we're friends again.
I mean, I think we both kind of didn't like the French after that revolution they had.
No, yeah, that was
So where was I? Okay, so King Leopold says, you know what, screw it. I'm setting up my own association to explore Africa. He gets all these explorers from other countries that explored Africa. He basically sets up his own mission, and well, not basically, he does set up his own mission, and he sends people there, and they're there to settle the Congo Basin, which no one up to that point had done because it was really impenetrable based on the geographical area. And at the time, they weren't really sure what was valuable about it. So all these other areas have been pretty much split up for the most part. Obviously, there's still some free areas, but so this area was pretty much untouched. And so Leopold sends them there. Like I said, the government had no interest. So then what happens is Otto von Bismarck calls for the Berlin Conference, and he says, hey, we need to figure out this area because everyone's fighting over it. So I think 14 nations went there, and it was declared a free trade zone. That's what happened. And yet somehow in this free trade zone, because it wasn't an official country or colony, I should say, King Leopold is awarded nearly 1 million square miles of land in the Congo Basin. I don't know how he went there. He's not even the government of Belgium. Like I said, he's like what you think of a Britain today. For people who are listening, if they don't understand, they don't have any. They have prestige and stuff. They have they have influence, but they don't have actual government power. So
constitutional monarchy, yeah.
Yeah, that's what it was, constitutional monarchy. So he is awarded all this land. He's like, they're like, it's a free trade zone though. And he's like, of course. So it's the Free State of the Congo. And spoiler alert, it was not free in any way.
No.
And it was barely a state. It was basically, think of it as
it was barely a state now, Bender. Come on.
It's barely a state now. But back then it was seen more as like he owned private, like you own private land. That's what it was, but it was a country. So King Leopold II owned as like the country, but not really a ruler. So anyways, what are they looking for? Well, there's different raw materials, but the main one they found, which was very precious, was rubber. So they set up all this stuff, right? They send people there and they go, we need labor. And they were trying to take over the entire market. So
Well,
then
how convenient. There's already a source of labor that exists.
Oh, look around here. Well, you
This
look at
land
that.
that guy I suddenly acquired came with a bunch of people on it. So
Oh,
that
interesting. Hmm. So as you can imagine, they well apparently it was slavery, but not slavery, sort of like the
It was
sharecroppers.
serfdom.
Yeah, where
that
they
serfdom is slave. I don't think there's gray areas in slavery.
yeah, I mean, it was like the sharecroppers of the South after they got freed when they were just like, we'll pay you basically nothing and you go back to working in the country.
Yeah, exactly.
It's like, so not really free.
Yeah.
So, but what happened is they get these natives from the area, like this, I can't remember which tribes it was, but, and they create the Force Publique. And they were basically the local people, but they were given more privileges, obviously, and stuff. And they were there to enforce these rubber quotas, like demands. And it's very similar to the Chinese ones under Mao, or I think the North Korean ones too, where they just create these huge quotas that you can't make. And so then you're supposed to kill people if they can't meet the quotas. That was a punishment by death if you can't meet your quota. Well, no one can meet the quota. So what they did was they gave guns and bullets to the Force Publique, and they said, all right, we don't want you to go hunting. They were afraid that people would go to these tribes and areas because obviously it's a big country and the Europeans didn't know if they could trust them. So they thought that they would take the ammo and just go hunting and then come back and say, oh yeah, we killed them or whatever. We enforced it. Of course. So what they made this rule because they were so worried that these people were going to waste ammo. They said you have to bring back a hand to prove you have killed someone. So the idea being you kill them, you chop off their hand, you bring them a hand saying, see, I killed them. That they have their hand. So what this does is this sets off it's a fucked up culture of like a system where basically a lot of times like these tribes, the people, the Congolese would just be like, fuck it, just take my hand.
Yeah. I was gonna
say you killed me, chop off my hand, say you killed me. And because at one point they were ordered these so you might be one so I didn't want to I'll just say it now, but so the only reason we know about this stuff is usually because Christian missionaries documented it because they actually weren't keeping any documents or anything and it wasn't getting out.
Bender, if you were committing a genocide, would you keep documents? I mean, the Germans did, but would you?
No, you're probably right.
Well, the Germans systemized it, so they kind of had no choice.
Yeah, they were
German efficiency.
Yeah. Oh my god.
We know how many people we killed with this exact shoe size in this region.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. They knew all the pairs of shoes. They knew like how many wedding rings. They would like document down to the last digit. Oh, the Germans. Their own.
They are very thorough. You have to give them that. But
their OCD is what screwed them over. So, anyways, when tribes knew these people would come, what happened was they would start attacking other Congolese people. Why? So they could kill them or just like chop off their hands. And when the guys came, they'd be like, here, take these hands so you don't have to chop off our hands. So yeah, so it's setting up this whole system of hand chopping. And there's photos to this day. You can see photos. There's famous photos of hands chopped off. Usually it's one because then they can't work if there's none, but a lot less efficient. But I'm sure there were some. So they chop off their hands, blah, blah, blah. I talked about that. Obviously, the Force Publique would kill people, raze down villages. King Leopold, at one point it gets out that they're teaching them how to take hostages, such as children, women, and such. And King Leopold's like, no, that's just propaganda. It's all lies. And then they found they would send out like actual books on literally manuals on how to take hostages properly and how, so you could have leverage. At one point there was a bunch because there's tons of chiefs. I can't remember. There was less than 100, but quite a few chiefs that were locked up in this infamous prison where people were dying every day in it because of the conditions. And yeah, they did really fucked up shit. They made the guys like rape their moms and sisters or whatever if they didn't meet the quotas. I actually hadn't heard about that ever since I've ever heard that what the Japanese did to Chinese in Nanjing, but yeah. So, anyways, the system gets even worse because then what they say is to the Europeans, hey, or probably maybe the natives too, that they said, hey, bring us basketfuls if you bring a certain amount of hands, because in their minds, for some reason, that means if you're killing a lot of people, or at least cutting off their hands, you're increasing work productivity, or because out of fear. It doesn't make any sense. Like, yes, Joe, you're right to have a confused look on your face.
I was gonna say, like, yes,
I mean,
all right.
maybe they were cutting
they're
off like an
scared,
ear
but
or
he is
something,
now
or
half as
tongue.
productive because he's missing a hand.
Yeah. I don't understand the logic. And remember,
Yeah.
the hand wasn't even the hand's supposed to be missing because it's supposedly they killed them and took their hand. That's the, obviously the idea. So it's like, wait, so you want them to kill them so that increases the rubber it made no sense. It was so stupid. But anyway, they said we'll give you more money the more hands you get. So that just incentivized them to just cut off people's hands. And then they're like, you can go home if you're European. Like, we'll just send you home with a bunch of money. So then obviously they were incentivized to just fucking torture people and cut off their hands. And people, I don't know how people did this. They interviewed a Congolese guy afterwards, like years later. It's a fucked up story. So everyone's massacred and they're going around chopping off their hands, and he's still alive playing dead. And they chopped off his hand and he had to not make, like, he had to act dead still.
He had to, like, not, oh, that's insane. That's crazy.
Even though he got his hand cut out, and then he said when they left, then he had to treat it and go get help. He just laid there and didn't make a noise when they chopped up his fucking hand.
You just gotta hope that they leave before you bleed out, because that's cutting some major arteries.
Yeah.
Doing that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's insane that he survived that. I mean, it really incredible person. So anyways, yeah, that becomes the system. And literally they're just massacring villages. And what happens is eventually it starts leaking out from the missionaries. And that's where the book The Heart of Darkness comes from, where the guy actually was, I think the actual author, like, took a trip through the Congo on a ship on a river, and he was like, oh shit, this is insane. This is like a wild place.
Oh,
and
That's
one word for it.
And so Arthur Doyle, the guy who wrote Sir Arthur Doyle, who wrote Sherlock Holmes, he wrote about a book about like the massacres and stuff and the death. And Mark Twain comes out against it, Booker T. Washington, and eventually starts to get in the newspapers. And that's where all the pressure comes from, because everyone wagging their finger at King Leopold going, what the fuck, dude? And he's like, nothing's happening.
Nothing's happening. Have you seen it? No.
Which is funny because he never saw it either. He never went there.
Right.
So
yeah.
he literally, so maybe he actually I don't know, but he literally.
No, he probably didn't know. His ministers are probably like, "Oh, it's fine. Everything's fine."
He makes an association for, like, called, I don't remember, something along the lines of the protection of native people or something like that.
Oh,
and
God.
it was just, and it was
it was probably some committee with a bunch of bureaucrats saying, like,
defend their rights.
We're helping them. We're bringing industry to these people. We're helping them.
But at the time, they weren't even bringing
Christianity.
industry. That's the thing. They ended up dividing certain sectors into the different economic zones. What happened is they overdid the rubber. All the men were basically, to meet the quotas, were out working, so they couldn't farm properly. So they ended up, the biggest deaths wasn't even from, killing the villagers. Famine and disease, because they were malnourished. And then Europeans coming had just had recent influenza outbreaks, and then these African people didn't have any antibodies or whatever you want to call, like they weren't used to it. So then diseases were spreading like crazy, and now you're unhealthy because the water was unclean. All their culture pretty much in certain areas collapsed because, again, you don't have the traditional way of life. You have literally everyone just working, or all the men at least, working towards the rubber quotas. So, and there was other ones too, other natural resources they were exploiting. But yeah, so basically they think maybe 50% of the population died. No one really knows though. I mean, there's different estimates, 10 million, 20 million, 13 million, because the records weren't kept well. Different historians think different things, but everyone, Jared mentioned genocide earlier. That's a big debate to this day. No one really knows whether to call it a genocide or not, because a lot of historians say it's not a genocide because they weren't systematically trying to kill the Congolese. They were just trying to scare them by
work them to death and like
yes.
labor camps.
Yeah.
Would you call what Stalin did a genocide? Like it's like
yeah. I mean,
They weren't trying to systematically exterminate a group of people. They were
Yeah.
trying to intimidate a group of people. But in the process, you're systematically killing them all. So
yeah, and
it's-
you kill them. They're responsible for the
yes,
famine.
and Bender, work will set you free.
Yes. And so yeah, famine, disease. I mean, it just was a train wreck. And so basically that ends up all coming out. Everyone's against it, and that's why Belgium was forced to take over, because everyone just went, oh, they read about it in the books and stuff. They went, what the hell is going on over there? Obviously they didn't have the internet or anything, so just reading the accounts of these missionaries and stuff who like went before governments and basically said, hey, like what, two of these, I think they were missionaries, I can't remember, they got sued by one of the big rubber companies because they were like, you're defaming our name for this. And how dare you tie us
How dare
to
you
this?
defame?
And yeah, they ended up getting off, thankfully, but yeah, it was pretty wild. So anyways, so it got a little bit better, I suspect, after King Leopold had to give it up. So that is the story of the Congolese sad period of their history, and getting conquered by Belgium, but there was different Europeans there, and eventually they did get taken over by the official government. But now that's why today in Europe, people like want to tear down this general statue and this King Leopold II statue, because both like the
He has a
general,
statue there? That should be taken down.
no, in Europe.
The one in Europe or the
Oh,
one
in
in
Europe.
Congo?
Europe,
Both.
yeah. No, Joe, I don't think there's one in the Congo.
I would hope not.
Israel got one of Hitler. Ukraine has one of Stalin.
It's a reminder.
There's a lot of stuff.
This is what can happen.
Yeah.
There's a lot of stuff that Mussolini built that's still used in Italy today.
That's true.
That is true. But a statue, I think, of a person's a little bit like.
If you think about it, the Volkswagen Beetle was made under the Nazis. It was the car of the people.
Well, I mean, what about like Mercedes in
Honda.
general? They built tanks and
Yeah.
big cars.
And BMW started as like plane engine builders for
That's you think of BMW. Yeah.
Yeah.
Mercedes like built mostly like tanks and cars and all sorts of shit. And now Jewish people drive their cars.
Hugo Boss made the Nazi uniforms,
and that's why they were stylish as shit.
That's fair.
Look at a military uniform like around the world. You tell me the Nazis weren't the best looking ones.
Well, they're certainly better than the communists because they're always boring. They always dressed in these like ugly clothes that are just
because they had no money and they had too many people to put in.
Well, what happened now? What's the excuse now?
They didn't have enough guns for people. Everybody uniform.
Yeah. Kim Jong-un, their uniforms are actually pretty stylish, actually. Have you seen them?
No, they're not. Yeah, I've seen them.
I mean, they're not like,
Not
looks like something,
arguing over for the rest of the podcast, arguing over which dictator had the best uniform.
It's Gaddafi.
Yeah, we're kind of going off here.
Alrighty,
so
well, I'll go next because I'm also in Africa, but we're going back to 264 BC, and it's northern Africa. Africans seem to have a hard time with genocide, but
All right.
Well, this is a completely different group of people. Technically, this is the Phoenician. It's a Phoenician colony. So,
Oh, I wonder what it could be, Joe.
oh, I wonder what it could be. So I decided to talk about the Punic Wars, specifically because I think what gets glossed over a lot in the Punic Wars is everyone kind of talks about how it, kind of made Rome a superpower and it launched their sphere of influence in that part of the world for the next 800 years. But it kind of gets glossed under the rug that they basically wiped out a group of people to do this. So in 264 BC, Carthage is the other major superpower in the Mediterranean, other than Rome. In fact, they're at the time they're like the superpower, and so eventually they kind of come to heads over control of Sicily, and who really controls it, because Rome starts to get some influence in Sicily, and so eventually it leads to war. And Rome is kind of shit out of luck because Carthage has a very powerful navy, and most of this war is fought on the water. And Rome has no navy at this point. They're like, well, shit, we have a great army, but we have no navy. So how do we win? So what they do is they're like, well, okay. So they build a bunch of like shitty boats, and they come up with this idea of like making this like grapple that like goes onto the Carthaginian ships and like locks it in place. So they have like a bridge. So basically, they're like, we're gonna bring our army to you so we can beat you on the water because we can't you can't fight you on land. Or so let's bring our best soldiers to you on the water, and that's what they do. And the war lasts from the first war lasts from 264 to 241 BC, and Rome comes out on top. Technically, they kind of signed a peace treaty, and Rome ends up taking control of Sicily. That war, there's not a whole lot of information about it, especially a lot of the battles. Most of the battles are naval battles. It's the second one, the one fought between 218 and 201 BC, the Second Punic War, that everyone like kind of knows about. And this one's the one with Hannibal. Again, it's famous crossing the Alps, which, by the way, you should never do. At least not in ancient times. You shouldn't do it. Now you can just kind of fly over them, so it doesn't really matter. But anyway, so Second Punic War breaks out. Hannibal decides to do a preemptive strike on the Romans, and so what he does is he leads his men. He leads 30,000 men with 16,000 cavalry and 37 elephants, which was the tank of the ancient world.
Ask Alexander the Great.
Yeah. Over the mountains, over the Alps, and he arrives in Italy, northern Italy, with 20,000 men, 6,000 horses, and I think they don't know about elephants, but they think the max he arrived with was like 4. So he basically lost almost like a good 50 to 60% of his army crossing the Alps. And when he arrived, he did actually end up catching the Romans off guard because he arrived in the winter. And the Romans, in ancient times, you didn't invade in the winter. It wasn't something you did. You hunkered down and you had a winter camp. And so you kind of caught the Romans off guard, won some major early victories in the north, and got all the Gaelic tribes, towns that are like under Roman rule to rise up and kind of join him. Like, oh, cool, we're going to join Carthage because they're actually kicking Rome's ass. And they did. And for a long time, Rome's policy was, we can't beat them in the field. We just don't have the army. Hannibal's too good of a general. So we're just going to lead him around in a wild goose chase and not engage. And they did
one general. There was one general who beat Hannibal pretty handily. Like it kind of helped cause the decline of his campaign.
That's a little later. But for the most part, in the early campaign, there's a lot of minor skirmishes. And then eventually the Senate gets kind of tired of that. And they kick out their current dictator / general. They're like, no, we need to actually have a decisive battle. We need to do it now. And so they kick him out. And he was actually doing okay. He's basically fighting a war of attrition with Hannibal. Yeah. But he was losing. Well, he wasn't losing, but like he was kind of keeping Hannibal at bay. And the senators don't like that. So they kick him out. And then eventually they decide to send the largest force they've ever had of Roman. It was like 80,000 troops. Against Hannibal. Complete disaster. That's the Battle of Cannae. Complete disaster. for the Romans. 60,000 500 Romans are killed or captured. They lose like 4 senators, like notable senators in the battle.
Nice.
And yeah, it's considered like the biggest Roman defeat like ever. And so, but that was very early on too. And so for the next 11 years, Hannibal is just in Italy, kind of wreaking havoc. And it's kind of like just a back and forth stalemate war for 11 years. There are certain towns are defecting over to Carthage, and then Rome will recapture them. And then Hannibal will direct his forces to this town, and then Rome will go take back a bunch of other towns while he's doing
Well,
that.
That was a strategy. They said like, we'll let them take the towns, and when they leave,
We'll just go get them again. Yeah,
We're very smart.
yeah. So they're basically able to just kind of keep him like running around for 11 years, and while he's doing that, they're sneakily building up their forces, and then they are winning the war in Africa. Basically, because Rome, I don't think I said this earlier, Carthage is in northern Africa. It's in modern day Tunisia, is where that is. And so they basically are winning the wars in Iberia and northern Africa. And eventually Scipio invades North Africa and gets right on Carthage's doorstep. And Hannibal's like, oh shit. And so they have to recall Hannibal to defend Carthage. And so he goes back, and he gets back, and he has about 15,000 troops after 11 years. And he gets back, and eventually they have to surrender because they can't beat Rome. Rome has got them surrounded. And at this point, Carthage basically is forced to give up all of their holdings outside of. They keep some stuff in Iberia, but basically they're reduced down to this Carthage itself, the city itself. And so Rome kind of just takes over the rest of their holdings. And I should mention this too. Carthage is more of a mercenary army. So a lot of their soldiers didn't have as much loyalty to the actual city they were fighting for. In fact,
It's
after
almost
the first,
like that would happen to the Romans
yeah,
many years later.
you might think so, yeah. But actually what happened was after the first Punic War, Carthage actually faced a mutiny of a lot of their mercenaries, and they put it down, but they faced mutiny problems quite a bit actually. And then years later, it's like the 140 BC, 140, it's 149 to 146 BC, so it's the shortest one. They have the final Punic War, and at this point, Carthage is not a superpower anymore. It's just a city. It can't even trade. Wait, it can't even wage war without getting permission from Rome. Like it has to, and so which is shitty because Rome's other ally, Numidia, keeps invading them and just like raiding their land and stuff like that. And they keep asking Rome, "Can we fight back or do anything against them?" Rome's like, fuck you. We don't care about you. We like Numidia more than you, basically, is what they're saying. So eventually Carthage gets fed up with it. So they build up their own army and they go try to stop Numidia, and they lose horribly. It does not work out for them. But Rome uses this as an excuse to be like, hey, you broke the treaty. So even though you lost, we're gonna invade you. And so they come down with an army of about 50,000 people, surround the Carthage. Well, actually, the first thing they do is get there is they demand Carthage. All right, look, you're going to surrender all of your weapons to us, and so the Carthaginians do, and they're like, okay, fine, that's fine, we'll do that. And then Rome's like, all right, cool. Now you're going to move 16 kilometers to the south and rebuild your city there and burn your old city. And Carthage is like, no, we're not doing that. And so they lock the gates, shut the gates on the Romans, and start rebuilding their armaments. And they start trying to get another army raised up. But after a while, they do end up having to surrender to Rome. And Rome is not kind, to say the least. They just systematically go through the city on the last day of the siege and kind of murder everybody. They take about 50,000 people hostage and sell them into slavery. And then this doesn't make it any better. But the one thing that people say about the Punic Wars, and it's where the phrase comes from, salt the earth or whatever, is that the Romans salted the earth around.
Literally. So they couldn't, something would grow.
That's actually not true. They didn't
really
do that. that didn't do that. That was actually something that came up invented in the 19th century. And just
That's
kind of
I thought that's where that came from. Wow.
Yeah, I thought
well, it
that
is.
too.
It is where it came from, but it was not. They didn't actually happen. It's just the phrase was something that was added on in the 19th century. It said that they did, but there's no actual evidence that they did that.
Sounds like something a Roman would say, Joe.
Possibly. There was a Roman senator who, like, after the Second Punic War, he would end every Senate session with, "And Carthage must be destroyed." Like,
I was about to bring that up. I didn't want to interrupt, but I was like, wasn't there a guy who was like, we must burn Carthage after,
Yeah.
even if it wasn't related to Carthage?
No, it was
or
in the end
war,
of every
like,
Senate session.
yes, we've had a lot of trade and oh, and by the way, we should destroy Carthage.
Yeah.
Every speech,
every single time. Which eventually they did. So I
He's
guess
an
you gotta
honest
see it.
politician. You know where he stands. Oh,
Yeah.
Well, he's
At
not a
least he was
hypocrite,
honest.
at least.
I'll give him that. But yeah, those are the Punic Wars. And again, like a lot of people know those stories. And a lot of people know a lot about Hannibal. He's a famous general and stuff like that. And it made the Romans a superpower. But they don't really talk about how Carthage is a very influential civilization, early civilization that was just wiped out. And a lot of their influence just isn't talked about. I mean, they were one of the biggest empires or maritime empires in the early world, and it just didn't work out.
Yeah, they
for
made
them.
it to America. You didn't hear about that, Joe?
Oh yeah, yeah. Them,
They were
the
such good
Templars.
maritime guys. Everyone I
Yeah.
heard said that Carthage, when they were running away, they found America.
Yeah, they in their triremes. Yeah, I think they could do
Yeah.
this.
They made it there.
Totally across the Atlantic, easy peasy.
Yeah. But yeah, that's the Punic Wars in a nutshell. Rome's great victory was also the downfall of a pretty interesting civilization. I mean, another Northern African people.
So if you're conquered, basically, you're screwed. Is what we're
Well,
learning.
yeah, exactly.
And they might genocide you and like sell you into slavery.
Yeah.
My story's a little bit different.
One last thing on the what's it called, the Punic Wars. I looked up a little bit more about the Battle of Cannae. What I fucking forgot to mention is that's the kind of battle that cemented Hannibal as a military genius. Basically, because the way he did it was he basically just made the center of his line. He put his weakest troops. So the Romans thought they were winning, but really what was happening was they were pushing farther and farther in, and they were getting surrounded by his best troops that were on the wings, and so they killed themselves, basically.
Smart move. Smart strategy.
Yeah, it was smart.
Very interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, mine's gonna be a little bit different. Mine actually is kind of Rome, more like the Holy Roman Empire, but it's actually the war against the Saxons.
Oh, okay, that's a good one.
Yeah, because this one's it ends differently than the other two, just because while there are some massacres, it's more like all the Saxons just get deported and they forcibly settle other people in the area.
As you do.
As one does. Instead of killing all of y'all, we're just gonna make sure y'all don't come back and take everything you have and force you to march. So anyway, like there's like about a 30-year war with the Saxons. Charlemagne was the head of the Holy Roman Empire at this point. And after this really fucking long war, they against the Saxons, which was essentially like German-ish tribes, because the Holy Roman Empire included like Italy, France, a little bit of Germany at this point. It was kind of like an amalgamation of like these smaller countries. Charlemagne's big contribution was unifying a lot of it, and kind of setting the standard for education and culture in Europe. Tried to create his own like Renaissance, but it was a little while before that actually like took root. But anyway, after this long war with the Saxons, he just essentially pushed them won the war absolutely, and then just deported everybody and successfully deported all of them and settled his own people there.
Yeah, sounds about right.
Yeah.
Christopher Lee has a heavy metal album about this.
Yes, actually.
Which is my favorite. One of my favorite Christopher Lee facts, which is a lot of them, is he was also in a heavy metal band. He was also a spy in World War II, which could fill a whole video on its own. So
yeah. Well, it's interesting how Charlemagne did it though. Like like during the war, he burned down Irminsul, which is is like this Nordic tree of life. Essentially, it's like a living god they had that he burned down, and then he like instilled Christianity in them. Like he pretty much took over their land and their people through like warfare, religion, and like resettle and forcibly resettling and deporting them. Like craziness.
Well, sounds like a lot of what we did in America with Native Americans, but you
Yeah.
know,
Yes,
I was gonna say
yes,
Trail of
as one
Tears
does,
comes
as
to
one does.
mind when we talk
Yeah, I was
about
gonna say it sounds
forced
exactly like the Trail of Tears.
Forced march, taking the land, settling your own people there, instilling your own religion, burning down their gods. Yeah,
Sounds about
Yeah.
right.
I thought this one was interesting just because of the fact that it's like it was a successful deportation and culture swing without like the usual like just straight up genocide.
Where did
Yeah,
the
the Incas-
Saxons go? Do you remember when they said they went? Did they go to Britain?
They went to like Eastern Europe,
Eastern Europe. Okay.
like farther over.
Mm.
Some of the Nordic
Interesting.
countries too. They went there, but
I know the Incas did that with different groups. When they didn't want the people rebelling, they would mix them. They would move them, but they would also mix them with other conquered people. So then they couldn't have the same language, so they couldn't communicate to rebel.
oh yeah,
Pretty
the
smart.
Native Americans in the United States did that with other tribes. Like
Yeah.
crazy.
It's almost like we got good at systematically eliminating people.
We figured it out eventually.
Are we proud of that? We did it, guys. We learned. We figured out we did good.
We did good.
Step one, kill their god.
Kill their god. I was gonna say, after Charlemagne's death, he's kind of the reason you have Germany and France.
He is.
Yeah.
Oh, the funny thing is, Germany and France as countries both try to claim him as their like founder. They're like, no, he was French. No, he was German. How dare you? Yeah.
Well, he gave it to all three of his sons.
Who
So
are
one son,
all fuck ups. All three of them are just fuck
yeah, all
ups.
three of them were fuck ups.
Yeah. And like there's not a lot of people who die in history where historians can point to their death specifically as cultural decline. Charlemagne is one of them. Like
Well,
that
that's
man's
true.
death specifically caused cultural decline in Europe.
Him, Alexander the Great.
Mhm.
I'm sure there's more.
It's a short list of like people who are like
Yeah.
that specific death caused the decline of culture in the whole like region.
Oh
Put some Chinese emperor or something in there too.
yeah.
Yeah.
I'm sure. Who was the last Khan?
I don't know. There's a
Was it
lot of
Kublai?
cons.
It wasn't Kublai. He wasn't the last one. I
No,
don't
he
know.
wasn't the last. I don't know who the last one was, but Kublai's the one who conquered China. But at
Yeah.
that point, it had been split up into like 4 or 5 regions. After Genghis died, it got split up, like the Golden Horde, and then they conquered the Middle Eastern one. A lot of them became Muslim and just kind of integrated there after they massacred people in Baghdad.
Yeah,
They were like-
talking about conquered peoples.
As
Yeah.
one does. As one does.
So, and then
Oh.
yeah, Kublai eventually conquered China over in the east, but he wasn't the last. So I don't know who the last was, but yeah.
I know
Anyway.
Genghis. In the Genghis Khan, it's like a percentage of the people in the world can trace their lineage back to
Yes,
him.
it's like 0.1%. Like it's a lot, like because of all
Yeah.
the rape.
Yeah. It's like 1 in 25 people in like Asia or like some part of Asia can
Yeah,
have ancestry to, like 1 in 25 have ancestry.
directly.
That's-
That is
that's crazy.
insanity.
That's a lot of fucking.
Fucking and sucking.
Yeah. Well, the Saxons have kind of got the shit end of the stick in a lot of different areas in history.
Yeah,
So-
but they also conquered the Celts, so
That's true. Yeah.
with
no.
the Angles. So
Yeah.
So the Germans and the French essentially killed their god and moved them.
I mean, it's
Yeah.
just the cycle of. I mean, it's like talking about
Like
the
conquest. It's like the history of humanity. It's like we're taking these people, we don't like them, we're taking what they got, and then they're moving on.
Well,
Who will
Charlemagne
conquer
himself.
America?
Charlemagne
God,
himself.
I'd be
is-
so embarrassed if Canada conquers America. I'd never live that down.
Yeah, Charlemagne
Like
himself.
Canada,
1,000
they
years.
exist because we let them exist.
Canada just like has the maple flag over in America in like year 3000. Come on, guys. Fucking
Oh,
Canada.
that's
of all the
very
places.
generous. You think we're gonna get 1,000 years? We've barely made it 200.
Yeah.
But I mean, like, how many actual countries have made it that long? Like, there's not a lot.
Rome.
And the ones that have, like,
got it.
That's about
the ones
it.
that have changed their system of government repeatedly.
Yeah. Yeah, I was gonna say Rome, but really did Rome because it was the Roman Republic, then it was the Roman Empire.
I was
Exactly.
gonna
like-
say, if we're gonna go with
Yeah.
that, China's done it. They had an emperor system. They just changed their emperors and who was
Yeah.
the dynasty.
Different dynasties, yeah.
But it was all emperors, yeah.
That's true. And Charlemagne's kind of proof of that because he is the successor to the Roman state technically at that point.
Yes.
Talk
But,
about
like,
people.
Would you say the Vatican is technically the successor of the Roman state, though, at this point?
You could argue that it is the last surviving institution from that empire. So did it really fall? There's still a surviving institution from that time. It's
You have brought this up in like 3
I know it's a
podcasts.
dumb argument, but it's
It is
interesting.
the
I
Roman-
agree it's a dumb argument, but it's like, it's one people make a lot, and I don't like it.
Yeah, I don't like it either, but it's
I don't like
interesting.
it.
But you could argue that about a lot of things.
Okay, what if like the institution of a republican democracy?
Well, that's a religion.
or, like,
It's different.
state?
It's different. You could argue that like Buddhism or something like that's an institution that's been around since
I would
Yeah.
argue Judaism. I mean,
Yeah, you could.
places
You
all
could.
over the
Religion
fucking
is-
world. Like,
Yeah, religion is different. The only reason I said that is because technically the Vatican is its own country, so it's like, it's still independent.
Yeah.
Yeah,
It's also that shit is just weird too.
yeah, no,
no fucking king. I've been there, and it's crazy. Like, there's like 40-foot walls around the whole fucking place. You have to go through like a giant metal detector to get in. It's like, it's the most secure country in the world. It's crazy.
well, I
Gotta
bet it
protect
is.
the Pope.
Gotta protect the Pope's
Pope.
money.
The Pope.
That's
Uh,
good. That's another video we could talk about, just how the Pope controlled Europe through money and fear of God.
Yeah, no kidding. He was
Yeah.
the
All right,
kingmaker for God knows how long.
All right. That was our podcast on conquered peoples. On a king who owned an entire country privately, and how him wanting Belgium to be a world power and a colonizer led to a lot of pain and suffering, and how Carthage could have gone either way with their fight with Rome, but in the end, Carthage was burned to the ground and completely reduced to nothing after the 3 Punic Wars, and how it's very effective when you conquer people to simply just take them from their land and move them to a completely different area. The Incas did this as well when they conquered people, and how effective that is in completely disrupting an area and a people so that they stay conquered. All right, guys, you can find us on YouTube or Spotify at A Good Story. Until next time.